Welcome back to another episode of the World Through Zen Eyes podcast. I'm Myung-An Sunim here with...
I'm Dr. Ruben Lambert.
And we are back. Have any questions?
I do. Actually, on the way over here, I was reflecting and contemplating, and I was thinking about the role of questions in the practice of Zen. Because some traditions don't really, let's say, promote or welcome questions. And I feel like the very foundation of Zen Buddhism is to ask questions. Mm-hmm. And even if we look at the sutras, the way that each sutra is designed is where somebody asked the historical Buddha, Sakyamuni Buddha, a question, and that's how the sutra unfolds.
Right.
And there's a lot of lore surrounding this notion of asking a question to a Zen monk, and my mind reflected on a commercial from, I believe, the 80s or 90s, where I think it was a Gatorade commercial where two people climbed this large mountain. So there's the arduous task because one has to first fight through hardship and persevere and be diligent, and then you arrive, and then there's a peaceful Zen monk sitting there, and then you get one question. And the commercial was a Gatorade commercial. I don't remember exactly how it went at that point, but I think they asked something about what is the best drink to quench your thirst. Yeah, so they worked really hard just to ask a question. And then one more thing, I had read about Songchol Kunsunim. He was the patriarch of Choge order. And in the article, they talked about news reporters that would come to him. And again, they would ask a question. And there was no mountain, but he gave them a mountain. He said before they can ask a question, they had to do 3,000 deep bows.
Right.
Right. So those kinds of things. There's a lot of just lore around the idea of questions and things like that in Zen.
Yeah, I think he was, for the lack of a better word, famous for that.
Right.
Although, like I said, it's the arduous exertion doesn't have to be 3,000 bows. In his case, perhaps that's what it was. Yeah, the way that the sutras are, in fact, written out is, like you said, there's a question that is being asked of the Buddha, and then the Buddha answers the question. And, within Zen tradition, if we're going to go purist, if there isn't a question, their monk doesn't say anything.
Right.
So because the idea being whether the sources are being scriptural and the sutras, and we have 84,000 sutras, what do you talk about? Sort of willy-nilly.
What part, right?
Yeah. And the underlying principle of that is that which is partially also the reason why the 3,000 bhas per se is that the mind regurgitates into the forefront of the mind, so into the conscious sphere, questions and thoughts and ideas and this and that, and the practice really is growing familiar and aware of that is a thing going on. When we do not, there's a lot of identification with the thought, and again, this is sometimes displeasing to hear to thinking intellectuals who pride themselves or rely so heavily on the workings of their mind. And this isn't to say that Zen teaches, we should just be brainless, mindless thing. But the idea is to bring into focus or into awareness, the question of the question the question. And this is where Songcho Sunims and others like him, that was the idea. There was I believe it was a Tibetan monk who just finished the 3-year silent retreat in seclusion or something to that effect. And he comes out of the retreat and, of course, besieged by practitioners and all wanting to learn something. And the question is thrown. And the question is, how is one to think of their spouse or in the relationship? It's a relationship question. And the monk says, well, who wants to know? Come here at 3 a.m. tomorrow. Yeah. This is perhaps I'm botching the story a little bit.
Yeah.
It's anyway,
the point is
the
most
essence of
important.
it. Yeah. And people say, well, it's 3 o'clock. It's a little early, and X, Y, and Z, and a slew avalanche of excuses and pardon me comes up, and so easily are the multitude deterred by simply the fact that if you really want to know, you ought to come here at 3 a.m. and everybody all of a sudden is too busy. And so that brings the question, how much really did you want to know the answer?
This is a very good point right here.
And of course, well, the most interesting part of it is that for the people who do come, he says, of relationships, or spousal relationships, I think in particular, he says, one and the other ought to be nice to one another, for soon one will be dead. And that was the teaching. End of story.
That is wonderful.
And that's a whole other thing.
That's a whole other thing.
That's a whole
But what
other
I'm taking
thing.
away about what you're saying is, because I think we see it sometimes with some of our practitioners, this moment in time where you have this exchange with someone who has the Zen master, who has diligently worked through some of these problems and has had some insight, some enlightenment into the reality of life. And on the other side is the person who's suffering, who at first glance, they appear as though they're suffering deeply and they want this suffering to be resolved. And so when someone comes and their mind is very loose or very playful, or their mind is not really committed to the resolution of their suffering, then they ask a question and it almost appears like just you're playing.
Right.
And then how serious do you ask a question? If you truly come and you understand that what is about to be expounded to you can literally alter the trajectory of your life, how do you not come with the mindset of great reverence? Some people just don't, right? And this also links to what Unsan was very recently talking about Banya Shimgyon, the Heart Sutras. He said when you respect it, you can memorize it in a day. And it's not the same thing, but I'm just saying, if you ask a question with respect for yourself or respect for the moment and what can come of it, you don't play. If someone tells you 3 a.m., how bad do you want? How bad do you truly want?
How bad do you want it? Yeah.
Because I feel like some people ask a question and it's not really, I'm going to absorb it and apply it in my life. It's, I want you to now tell me, and then whatever you say, somehow magically by what you say, will make everything go away. And that's not the case.
It is a matter of respect. That is one thing. It's to a large degree a cultural element also.
Right.
We have professors who profess, but the progressive and this is rooted in legitimate concerns that the teacher or the professor or the guide, if such is the case that the guides have misguided in the past, on what grounds do I just hand over my trust to the guide, right? And so there's some validity to that. On the other hand, like you said, then sort of why bother? So person has to sort that out in their mind. If you are respectful of your teacher, if you're respectful of the monk or the Zen master, whatever, then you have to decide on either one or the other. And especially when it comes to the caution of simply matching what is being said, matching the answer to the already pre-existing understanding of the person. Because then you're not learning anything. You agree because it agrees with you, and you disagree because it disagrees with you.
Right.
Then might as well just talk to yourself in a mirror.
Right. That's the point where some people don't even ask a question. They
Right.
just want you to tell
Confirmation
them.
of their own.
Confirmation. It's not a question.
Right.
It's a confirmation of what. Yeah.
And there's a time and place for that. Right. So many times we hear it in the sutras when a disciple makes a declaration, and the Buddha says, yes, it is so, or it says, yes, it is so, but X, Y, and Z, and corrects it slightly, adjusts it slightly, or adjusts it gravely, whatever it may be. But it's what is the mindset, what is the intention, what is the understanding, and one has to know those things. That's why these arduous obstacles to being afforded an opportunity to ask a question of a master is for this very reason. Have you genuinely thought about your question? Do you genuinely, is this a question that's going to potentially have this impact that just cracks you open and you're free and some shackles fall off, or something to that effect? Nojang님's way of doing that with our own Sanim was if he asked a question that he hadn't processed or hadn't thought about, just sort of shot out of his mouth the way that you're talking about, where it's
Like
just a
slingshot,
conversation. Hey, you know what? Hey.
My toe itches. Why does my toe itch?
And if the question was that, I don't want to say shallow, because the questions, there are no good and bad questions. Questions are questions, and in a sense, we could say all questions are good for their ability to bring about understanding. But that's just the question. But what the mindset behind it is, So Nojangnim's way was, if Unsani asked a question that was like this, excuse me. Then simply the answer was don't cook. Don't cook meant don't eat. Don't eat. It wasn't a punishment. This is the other thing. There was a other element to it, that not only was it don't cook, don't eat, but because the two of them lived in a hermitage, that means the old man, the Nojangnim, didn't eat either. So there's another, I have caused my unsa to be hungry now, in a sense, or to not eat. And what it did is it sharpened the mind towards inquiry. And towards inquiry, again, there's a very, very big difference of genuine inquiry within oneself, thinking of the thing, trying to turn it ways and this way and that way, and simply the confirmation of one's own already established position. This is one of the bigger problems when it comes to our work of self-transformation.
It truly is. I think many people have a very hard time for a variety of different reasons. One of them being kojunkwanyam, right, that we discussed so many times. Another one being just the extent or limitations of our own knowledge. But I think it's something that inhibits breakthrough. Because if you're going to expound or shine a light on a crevasse, on a corner that is dusty and has not been attended to, that's going to require a person to look there. And obviously, if it's dusty and dark, that means you haven't looked there.
Right.
But sometimes when it's something new, people have a hard time, or a fear, they have a hard time changing their way of thinking and acting. So naturally, there's some resistance and pushback.
And you know, as I mentioned, it is cultural and to a certain degree, and it is right to a certain degree, but it must be known to the mind of the practitioner, not just the sort of autopilot setting. The conversation you have with the Zen master or a monk, whatever, let's call them synonymous if for lack of...
Yes.
It's not... Although we do chit chat because there's a time and a place, but by and large, it's not a conversation, and one has to understand the fact that where the truth, the truthful root of a person being doubtful of another person, like I said, there's some legitimacy to that, but what the way to organize it is me and the monk, or me and the master, or me and whatever, anybody, we are in fact the same. We are in fact the same, that we are both human beings, that we have the same equipment, tools that we're operating with and working with. What sets one person apart from another person is how much suheng they've done.
Yes.
How much practice they've done, how much training they've done. That is to say, a world-class athlete doesn't have 4 arms.
Right. They can't run faster because they have 4 legs. Right.
They run because they practiced. They run faster because they train. They run faster because they dedicate themselves. And this is what we are, in fact, respecting. You know, if you recall, in Taekwondo, we would honor students from other schools who came with the rank.
Yes.
And I asked Gonzani one time, I said, you know, such and such person, looking at them, they don't, you know, it doesn't match a thing. He said, yes, but we honor or respect their sweat.
Right.
Meaning we respect the fact that they've worked,
the effort,
the work that they put in.
Dedication.
Yeah, and sometimes it's, you know, wherever they practiced before, maybe they weren't challenged, or maybe the teachings weren't, whatever it may be, but the point is they practiced, they worked at it. And so that time put into work is to be honored. And this is the same thing. We respect the teacher on the account of their knowledge. When it comes to Zen, it's frequently on account of the knowledge of first-hand experience, which then we have to understand isn't easy to do. You know, I think you had brought up once, who was it that was giving a talk and a monk walked in?
Oh, William James, the father of psychology. There's an anecdotal story where he was giving a talk at a university, and then a monk walked in and he said, I'm going to sit down and you give this lecture. Right.
And that was an acknowledgement of the fact that an academic approach to understanding of the mind is beneficial and needed and serves a purpose. But the first-hand experience from inside out, in a sense, and someone who has devoted themselves so thoroughly, so focused on understanding of a thing, ought to be given, the podium, in a sense.
Sure.
Now, it is the function of questions on both sides of the table, in a sense. Is on one hand, the student wants to know something. On the other hand, the master knows where the student is by the question the student asks.
I was going to bring that up, because a question is not just a question. We can open that up as a seed, and so many things come out of that. That was one of the things. When somebody asks a question, it is a reflection of the level of the person who's asking the question.
Right. And also, then later on, in training, because there are stages, right? And on some stages, these questions are just very chit-chatty questions, very superficial questions, asked out of flaring up of the mind, kind of curiosity, empty curiosity, in that it doesn't then get transformed into some practice. It's just the brain wants to know, mind wants to know, that just as it devours the world around itself, it just continuously vacuums in information, and so it wants to also vacuum the information, and it's not used for any true transformative purpose. And so there's a time for that, or there's a time of that.
Right, because the response also is a reflection of the level of the person who's asking the question. And I think this is a fascinating part of Zen, which I think you're alluding to, is that then over time, you can ask the same question and you get a different answer. Right. We both have had that experience with our Unsalam.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's puzzling. You can almost say, but Unsalam, last time you said, so the question there, we're talking about questions within questions. I guess the question there becomes, did the answer change? And I would say it's that you have grown, therefore your answer has changed. And you could look at children. If you look at the question early on of, where do we come from? And we say the birds and the bees. And then when children are in 4th grade, we have a different way to frame it. Then when they're in high school, is a different way to frame it. There's a natural development as one grows in knowledge and understanding.
Yeah, there's the knowledge
then
and
it's
understanding.
living and breathing.
Right. And the evolution. So it's evolutionary. There's that. And then there's something yet still, which is, what is the capacity at the time or the clarity of the mind of the practitioner to not even so much as to understand the answer, but to accept the answer. That's a big one, because I used to get all kinds of furious within myself when I would ask Simon. He would say, "Later, you understand."
I want to know now.
And I said, "Well, I'm not. I may not be very bright, but I'm not a complete imbecile. And so give it to me, and I'll sort it out." Or for years this was the case, and there came a time when I came to understand that and appreciate that. Some answers wanting to be answered in the mind, when given answers to, cause more suffering.
Right. And the Buddha has the Bangpyon, the example, right, of the arrow.
Yeah.
Where the person's been shot with the arrow.
Right.
And what he's talking about, people that ask some questions where the answers are not going to bring any benefit and actually could be an obstruction in their growth and progress, right?
Yeah, so the story, it's a person shot with an arrow, and when the physician comes, I believe it's poisoned arrow, and the physician comes and wants to pluck it out to tend to the wound, and the person says, wait, before you pull this out, I want to know who shot me. Was it a man or a woman?
Mm-hmm.
What caste were they from? What village were they from? What was the arrow made out of? What kind of wood? What kind of tip of the arrow? Is the poison made out of animal? Is the poison made out of plant? Is it, what fletching are the feathers of what bird on the arrow? What was the bow? What kind of bow did they use? What was the string, the bowstring? And on and on and on and on. Surely that person would die. And this is a lovely story. And of course there's layers and various meanings to it, but to say what questions are really the questions that are going to unbind one from the suffering. And the insatiable desire of the mind to move is a culprit. The mind moves, continuously boiling. And it regurgitates out of the entirety of the Aryashik, the storehouse consciousness, memories, stories, things, ideas, or what it thinks are ideas, and just this kind of great vat of boiling mind. And it's chaotic, by and large. Even though the person thinks, no, I'm chill, I'm all right, I have a thing. But if you look at the arising and the falling of the mind, and the rising and falling of the questions, and the source of where the question's coming from, just because it arose in the mind doesn't make it beneficial, doesn't make it useful. By and large, it's not useful. It's just, mind vomit, pardon my French.
I think Zen is a beautiful art. I say art because there really is no map or formula where we can step by step outline the responses of Zen masters. And I think that Nojangnim had his own style. Everyone has their own style. But sometimes when I think Unsanim would ask a question where he hasn't fully digested it, or it was coming out of that cloudiness or Aryashik vomit, let's say, Nojangnim could look up and say, it's very cloudy today. Right? Some kind of response like that. And I also think about in our exchanges with him, sometimes even when he would pose a question, it would leave me stuck because it seemed at the moment contradictory. And so my mind was it was almost like he would just rattle the mind to shake out all of the, barnacles or toxins or parasites that were attached to the mind. And one moment in time that I will never forget, it still stuck in my memory, was when we were back in the Elizabeth school, and we were in his house, and we were helping him, I think, take down wallpaper, and then he comes into the room with an apple in his hand, and he goes, one thing I want to show you guys or tell you guys is don't eat apples after 6 o'clock. It's bad for your digestion. And then he takes a bite out of the apple. And then I remember looking, and I was like, I'm pretty sure it's like 6:15 or something like that. And that rattled my brain for years to come. And so it's those moments even with a question can be so profound and deep that it can be something that just sticks with you for many years. And the point of it is not for you to, at that very moment, attain something. It's something that you think about over time and contemplate.
Yeah, and again, the sort of questions or the way that the question exchanges happen. Like we said, initially, it's just sort of very superficial bubbling of the mind.
Right.
And that's where the curiosities and those kind of questions come out. And then we have the Zen master asking question to the student. And at certain stage of practice, the expectation of the answer to be immediate is stressed. Immediate. And the mechanism of it is very interesting, because the idea is, don't BS me. Don't BS yourself.
Right. Yes.
Right? I ask, what is that? Pointing to a thing. The question asks for the immediate first thing that pops out of the mind,
Mm-hmm.
not for you or perhaps for the ego to try and formulate the most fantastic answer. And look
The
how much I
cleverness,
know.
right?
Look how clever I am.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm going to answer such a fantastic way. It's going to
I'm
blow
gonna
my
dress it up.
teacher's
I'm
mind.
going to dress up my response,
Right.
powder its face,
Yeah.
add some mascara,
Right.
make it glow.
And so that's in terms of the answer of the student, but also the questions are like that. So there are times when a person asks a question, but they've been incubating the question for not truly incubating it in the Zen way. So perhaps let's not call it incubating. They were dialing up. They were trying to formulate it and make it in to fit some expectation. I'm going to ask a very profound question, and my master will be impressed by how much I've come, around, how much practice I've done, or, I'm going to ask the best question ever, which is all a function of the mind. Again, in this case, a very egocentric thing. This sort of cleverness of a question that disguises itself as a question, really isn't a question. It's some strange flex.
Right. The point is not to learn and grow in knowledge.
Right.
It's to flex.
Yeah.
And understanding.
This is how much I know. So I'm going to ask you a question about the thing so far beyond my understanding. But, I think that'll be a cool
not knowing
question
that
to
Zen
ask.
masters have the great sword or sickle that can chop you down
Right.
from the root at any given moment.
And they'll ask a question back, and then just, you stumble over your teeth, and you say, immediately kind of, like you said, sickle to the ego.
Yeah, I remember doing that early on. We were, again, doing some kind of work. There's a lot of work in Zen, right? Boshi practice early on. Well, we still do it to this day, but we did a lot of that with our unsanim. And we were building, you were doing some kind of woodwork. And I remember I had read something about Banya Shimgyon. And of course, in my weak understanding of there's no good and bad, I said, unsanim. Again, I want to just show off that I know something about Banya Shimgyon. And I was very green at the time. I was like, unsanim. Oh, you were using some kind of glue that smelled bad. Right? So my mind, again, at that moment, I just want to show off what I know. And I said, look, it smells bad, but there's no good smell or bad smell.
Right.
And he goes, yeah.
It's a question of no question.
But some smells can kill you. And I was like, ding. He
Right.
struck me right in the heart. That was a zing that I never forgot, too.
It is a monkey see monkey do kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. And
Right.
there's Zen is not safe from posturing, and Zen is not safe from disease of the spiritual kind, which is even more so problematic when the mind's delusion is that of profound understanding of something. And this is in particularly with the whole idea of there's no good and bad kind of thing, which is an advanced is not even a word here, but the Buddha said that for one who clings to the idea of emptiness or this kind of negation of things, even the Buddhas can help him, because if one's delusion is, for the lack of a better word, practical or worldly or tangible, there's something to work with, some target, which is actually the shackles that bind, right? It's a material thing in a sense. But when the thing is of no thing, how do you unbind from a thing that is not a thing that binds? And mind is ephemeral and all of that, and so it becomes it's Dostoevsky in Crime and Punishment has a just fantastic line. He says that men will get used to anything, the scoundrel, right? And of course, in the context of the book, he's talking about the how human beings can grow so accustomed to atrocity that it no longer makes impact on them. But it's on the other hand, it's also how we can overcome such hardships, because we could essentially adapt or accept the condition, adapt to it, and then transcend it or work ourselves out of it. But this idea of minds and human beings' ability to adapt, it sort of also could lead to a complacency, etc., etc.
And then one can get lost in that realm.
Right, absolutely, and it's it's a understanding of how the mind functions and the trickery that it is capable of. We really are trying to the challenge is because the mind manifests what it conjures up, and when we are not aware of the going-ons, we become a victim of our own thinking, and questions are included, whether it's the questions, like you said, that it's sort of hollowed curiosities that are just adding to the mind noise, and sometimes aren't answered by the Zen master for that very reason.
Yes.
Sometimes the what we would perhaps call knowledge or information, maybe is better. More information isn't necessarily a good thing.
Right, more information isn't necessarily better.
Right.
Which can go against some of, I guess, common practices in mainstream education.
Right.
Especially and particularly when you're getting a doctorate. They just want you to research something to death.
Right.
And get as many sources as possible.
And that's the thing. It's
a separate thing outside. We're not talking about that per se. It's a separate thing outside of that.
Yeah, and more information. For what purpose?
Right.
That's the question. For what purpose?
Sometimes it's just more noise and more bunda in someone's head.
And the purpose isn't asked. We don't ask because it's just a natural state of our sensory interaction with the world, just vacuuming everything. And so constant barrage of information, seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching, thinking, this ravenous, insatiable hunger for information. But we don't ask information to do what with? Information to be used how? And when we don't ask that, and when there isn't an answer, it's just sort of intellectual gluttony that leaves it. And the saddest thing is that leaves one still not satiated. It's endless, and this is why we frequently call this world Yoke, the realm of greed. This is why we talk about greed as the poisons. It's this ravenous, insatiable thing. As the Buddha says, even if the rain were turned to gold, the greed will not be satisfied.
Right.
If it were only about gold.
Right.
But it's about the mind, largely. And when we don't inspect the consumption of information, and if we don't consider to what end it is being used or useful to us, the more isn't better. And the more frequently, more of a thing means many. If it were more of one thing, but it frequently just means more of many a thing, and that splinters the mind further and further into billion, quadrillion, bajillion fragments, and shatters the person, and then one doesn't know oneself because one is so thinly spread out across the that which interests the senses and that which interests the mind, that there isn't a self left, in a sense, to inspect. And so, the questions and the exchanges within Zen tradition are brilliant, isn't the word here, but they are unlike any other mechanism that I have come across in the world's going-ons. In my early years, I did a lot of shopping for the thing that will, and at that time we just, curiosity and interest and some, we could say perhaps even infatuation with the traditions of the world and what they have to offer, and Zen and its ways of doing things. Now, in retrospect, looking back, because then there's something that was interesting, I remember when it comes to monkhood, at least itself, I remember our first trip to Bengnimsa, and I saw far away on, a Buddhist monk, Korean monk, Sunim, and I remember distinctly the thought, why is he wearing my clothes? And it wasn't a fashion thing, like, oh, that's cool, I like that. It was as if this person there had literally went into my closet and stolen my clothes. It was a very bizarre thought. I wasn't quite sure what to do with it at the time, but so perhaps some other layer of interest or karmic tether to the tradition. But in retrospect, looking at it, it really is fantastically unique, and it transcends or circumvents the mind, unlike any other tradition that I know.
Yeah.
Because if, and this is where we get these things, the mind is the source of our suffering, but also the mind is the source of our freedom. But also the mind is neither source of the suffering nor the source of the freedom. The mind is the mind. And it's treacherous to try and at some time, at one point in time, at one moment, to have a conversation with the mind, and then the next moment completely negate what the mind, and sort of it's really a continuous kind of bob and weave interaction with oneself, which things to, and this is where wisdom and discernment and ultimately self-understanding come. And questions within Zen tradition have a very unique use, and at what time. And of course, and then we have these questions, what was your face before your parents were born?
Right,
and,
those are the huadus.
Yeah,
right, those
and the questions that are meant to sort of throw a wrench into the gears
rattle
of
your
logical
cage,
thinking.
shake your tree.
To arrest the
mind.
ponne, to arrest the insatiability of the mind, to arrest, or simply in a certain moment to immediately cut off ponne, which is to say by the sickle or of of the Zen method to cut off the suffering that the person is currently undergoing, if done rightly, if done precisely.
A question can also be a form of boshi, or generosity, too.
Sure.
In the sutras, Sakyamuni Buddha always, I remember after every question, would say,
Sanjara, praises
yes,
the
praises
question.
the question.
Yeah.
Why? Because he
Because
says
of
after.
your question, right? He says, great, good man or good woman of a good family, because of your question, the people gathered here will learn. You know, and it's sometimes a disciple asks a question when the audience is present
Yes.
that perhaps they know the answer to,
Yes.
but they feel that someone in the audience then could benefit from the question or from the answer to the question, or even sometimes that the question is meant to make people in the audience go, oh yeah, right, yeah, why is that? To sort of echo the question. So yeah, it's not chit chat.
No.
It's not shooting the breeze. It's not. It's for each time a question is asked, which one of its faces, which one of its mechanisms are being employed.
There's an interesting story. Sometimes a question can also be a challenge. A challenging question, and we touched about that earlier. So Zen has a very unique and particular way of turning a challenge into also a lesson. And there was a story that I was telling you earlier before we started the podcast, was of a Zen master was in his monastery meditating, and a samurai came and challenged the Zen master and said, give me a teaching of heaven and hell right now. And the Zen master spit in his eye, and the samurai became very angry and said, do you not know I'm a general of an army that has over 1,000 trained soldiers? And he picks up his sword,
raises it
over his head, and the Zen master says, look, there is the gate of hell. And then before he strikes, the Zen master makes a hapchang, put his palms under his head, goes into a state of peace, and offers his neck, and he says, this is the gate of heaven.
That's a lot of unpacking to be had there too, but yeah.
But again, it's just one of those exchanges where someone was trying to challenge with a question. The true intent wasn't to grow or learn or break free of their strong ego.
Yeah.
But somehow the Zen master turned it around, struck the heart, and actually gave a lesson of what is true peace. What is true happiness?
Yeah, and you know, having said all this, for people who do not ask questions, they cannot learn.
Yes.
So the want to learn, the genuine desire to learn, ends up in questions. The Zen warns practitioners about the source of the questions, like we said. Is it a sort of ego thing? Is it a this? Is it that? But
we
by and
encourage
large,
questions.
Of course, yes. Because we are to understand. And actually the most refined questions aren't questions that end up with more information. The answer doesn't give you anything. The answer takes away. It doesn't add to the noise of the mind. It takes away the noise of the mind.
A layer.
Yeah. And brings one closer to one true self.
Over your true self.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's our time.
Yes.
Thank you for your questions.
Yes. Very good questions today.
Very good questions.
But in the spirit of Zen, come up with more questions.
There you go. Yeah, the audience isn't asking much questions.
If you don't have questions, then you don't learn.
How can you learn? Right. Well, until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. I'm Myung-An Sunim.
From my heart to yours, I'm Dr. Ruben Lambert. If you like what you heard, please pass it on to someone else that can benefit from our podcast.